What's up, Chiefs Kingdom? Noah Gray here, tight end for the Kansas City Chiefs. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe to Josh's channel and check out showmefootball.com for more.
What is up, Chiefs Kingdom? Welcome back to another video on my channel. My name is Josh Fan of showmefootball.com and arrowheadaddict.com, covering your Kansas City Chiefs. And it is finally time that I make that video that I have been telling you guys about, that I said I was going to make this offseason. It is one of the first videos I plan on making this offseason, because starting this afternoon, NFL teams can officially apply the franchise tag to any impending free agent they so choose. And the Chiefs will almost assuredly be using the franchise tag on either Chris Jones or L'Jarius Sneed, which will give us a pretty good indication on what their offseason plans are. So with that being said, today I wanted to give you guys my opinion on who I think is more important to keep between Chris Jones and L'Jarius Sneed. If there's a way the Chiefs can keep both of them, I'll tell you what I would personally do, what I would like to see the Chiefs do, and then I'm going to tell you guys what I think the Chiefs are going to do. So let me start by saying who I think the Chiefs will use the franchise tag on. I believe the Kansas City Chiefs, whether it's this afternoon or sometime in the near future, because even though they can franchise tag a player today, it doesn't mean that they have to apply it today. They could do it the day before free agency if they wanted to. But anyway, I think they will franchise tag L'Jarius Sneed. And that is because since the Kansas City Chiefs franchise tagged Chris Jones last offseason, that makes his franchise tag, if you were to tag him for a second offseason in a row, it would mean that he becomes even more expensive and his tag number is even larger than if you were tagging him, for the first time. So you want to avoid that, really, unless you're absolutely certain that you're going to get a long-term deal done with Chris Jones before free agency. You don't want to hamstring yourself, because that franchise tag number, as soon as you apply the franchise tag, that player is on the books for that amount of money for this year, and that affects your free agency plans. Like L'Jarius Sneed, the franchise tag number for him would be $18 million, I believe, somewhere around $18 million. You can manage that. You don't love having the franchise tag number on the books when you start free agency, because that means it affects the amount of players the amount of money that you can spend, and you want to have the most flexibility entering a free agency. Free agency is in just a few weeks, and so if the Chiefs franchise tag Chris Jones and the franchise tag is like $30 million or something like that, then you just hamstrung yourself. When free agency opens, the legal tampering period is now kind of your artificial deadline to get a long-term deal done with Chris Jones. Otherwise, you're just kind of screwed. You're going to have to sit out free agency. But ultimately, you don't want both Chris Jones and L'Jarius Sneed to walk in free agency for nothing, because that is a possibility. If you don't use the tag, you could lose both of them. Franchise tagging at least one of them ensures that even if you don't keep them, they're not walking away for nothing. You could always tag and trade one of them. You could always just keep them for that one last year and then let them test free agency next offseason, kind of like the Chiefs did with Chris Jones this past year. So I believe the Kansas City Chiefs will franchise tag L'Jarius Sneed, and that will keep their options open with L'Jarius Sneed while they figure out Chris Jones and what's going to happen there. And if I had to guess right now, I do think Chris Jones hits the open market, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the Chiefs can't still bring him back. All the franchise tag does, guys, is keep a player from hitting the open market. So the Chiefs will make sure that one of L'Jarius Sneed or Chris Jones don't hit the open market. The best path to actually keeping Chris Jones and L'Jarius Sneed, in my opinion, is to tag L'Jarius Sneed. Yes, you're taking a big risk with Chris Jones, who is the player that I would rather keep between the two of them, and I'll get into that a little bit later. But because L'Jarius Sneed's cap number is much lower, if you franchise tag him, you can do that, and then you can do a Mahomes restructure, you can cut MVS, you can make a couple other money-saving moves. It's very possible and then you can come to a long-term agreement with Chris Jones, and then you can hammer out something with L'Jarius Sneed later. I think that's the easiest way to go about this. I'm not going to pretend the odds are great to keeping both L'Jarius Sneed and Chris Jones. They're not. It's probably more likely at this time. I'd say it's like 60-40 that they only keep one of them. And it sucks to say that. I'm sure you guys don't want to hear that, but there is a way to keep them for sure. I mean, there have been talks about a Patrick Mahomes restructure since Patrick Mahomes is being paid a lot of money right now, and he had a very large cap hit this year. He'll have a very large cap hit next year. If you look later down the line of his current contract, his cap hit is ridiculously low in the future, meaning that maybe the Chiefs and Mahomes could figure something out where they move money later down the line, and that way they can open up room to keep Chris Jones and L'Jarius Sneed. And look, guys, Mahomes, he makes so much more money outside of football now that I think it's very possible that he would agree to do that restructure, and he's just all about winning at this point, but he knows that these other guys want to get paid. It's not totally fair to Mahomes that he has to be the one that essentially takes a pay cut, even though it's really just moving money around and not him taking a pay cut, but that he essentially is sacrificing money over the next few years to make sure these other guys get paid. You would think, hey, this is a winning culture. Maybe these guys should be taking less money to stick around. But unfortunately, that's just not how it works. And I can understand that from a guy like L'Jarius Sneed, especially because L'Jarius Sneed has never gotten that big contract. Chris Jones has gotten a big contract so far in his career, but L'Jarius Sneed isn't making much more than the Chiefs' 7-round picks from last year. So, I mean, I totally understand that from a guy like L'Jarius Sneed. He wants to get his money. He was on Kay Adams' show the other day and was like, pay me. So, I get it. It'll be tough to pull off, but we'll see what happens. I'd say, though, it's probably a 60-40 chance that 60% being that they only keep one, 40% being that they keep both. So we'll see what happens there. All right, so now the part you guys have all been waiting for. Which player between L'Jarius Sneed and Chris Jones would I rather keep? I've said this for a long time now. Most of you that have been subscribed to my channel for a while know that I've been on the Chris Jones train the entire time. You have to find a way to keep Chris Jones above all. If it comes down to L'Jarius Sneed or Chris Jones, I think you have to find a way to keep Chris Jones. Even if you don't tag him, you tag and trade L'Jarius Sneed, but you do whatever you can to keep Chris Jones. Because let me tell you guys this. Let me tell you what. Go back and watch this past Super Bowl. Go back and watch the divisional round against Buffalo and tell me that the Chiefs win either of those games without Chris Jones. Chris Jones saved 14 points in both of those games. I even made a short about this. If you guys go to my shorts section after watching this video, and it highlighted the two plays in which Chris Jones saved touchdowns from being scored by the San Francisco 49ers in Super Bowl 58. Hell, you can even go back to last year. AFC Championship versus Joe Burrow. Chris Jones, they don't win that game without him. Super Bowl 54 even, that batted down pass that Chris Jones had towards the end, and creating all that pressure for guys like Frank Clark to get cleanup sacks and get all the credit when really Chris Jones was creating the initial disruption. Chris Jones is the engine to this defense. You do not win any of these Super Bowls in this Chiefs dynasty without Chris Jones on this team. And I don't think I can say the same for L'Jarius Sneed. Let me ask you guys this, and I want you to answer me honestly down in the comments when I say this. If Chris Jones had a season-ending injury before the playoffs, do you guys think the Chiefs still win the Super Bowl? Now, L'Jarius Sneed, if I say he had a season-ending injury right before the playoffs, do you guys think the Chiefs win the Super Bowl without him? I think they do. And I don't think they win one without Chris Jones, because there were enough guys in this secondary that Spags can get creative. He can move guys around. They lost Brian Cook, who was an integral piece to the safety room, and they didn't really skip a beat without him. Now, obviously, L'Jarius Sneed is a better player, and, he would have been a big loss, but in my opinion, Chris Jones is more impactful to winning. Because if you can't get pressure on the quarterback in the postseason, you don't win. Pass rush is the second most important thing to have on a playoff team behind quarterback play. You have to be able to get pressure. And without Chris Jones on this defensive line, you're not getting any pressure. Because Chris Jones draws so much attention, even when he's not getting sacks. And I've had this argument for years with people about Chris Jones' impact outside of getting sacks, because there have been stretches in Chris Jones' career where he didn't have a sack for a while, and everyone's like, oh, where's Chris Jones? What is Chris Jones doing? Chris Jones is invisible. No, he's not. Not if you guys watch the games, not if you guys understand defensive line play. Because for a long time, Chris Jones was the only true threat on that defensive line. So he was getting constantly double teamed. I think it was either last year or the year before. Hell, it may have been both years that Chris Jones was the most double-teamed defensive lineman in all of football. I'm pretty sure it was last year because it was Aaron Donald, and then last year Chris Jones kind of eclipsed Aaron Donald in all those statistical categories, and he was the most double-teamed defensive lineman in all of football, and that was for a reason. He had 15 and a half sacks last year, was a Defensive Player of the Year finalist. I love L'Jarius Sneed. L'Jarius Sneed was great this year. But are we going to pay a guy life-changing money? Are we going to pay a guy elite cornerback money for 1 year of elite production when we know Chris Jones year in and year out is the best pass-rushing defensive tackle in football right behind Aaron Donald? Like, I feel like so many people last year, because of the way the negotiations went with Chris Jones, kind of turned on him a little bit. And I feel like a lot of the talking points about age and age value have kind of convinced people that L'Jarius Sneed is more important to keep than Chris Jones. No, he's not. Chris Jones is more impactful to winning. He just is. Because here's another question for you guys that I want you to answer honestly down in the comments. Is Chris Jones still Chris Jones if L'Jarius Sneed is not in that defensive backfield? Yes, he is. Chris Jones is still one of the best, if not the best, pass-rushing defensive tackle in the NFL, even if L'Jarius Sneed isn't on the back end. Is L'Jarius Sneed still what he is? Is he still what he was this season if Chris Jones isn't applying pressure up front? No, he's not. He's not. He just isn't. Like, Chris Jones is more impactful to winning. And then the most frustrating part about this debate that I have with fans and Chris Jones is, oh, well, he's 30 years old and you don't want to pay him on the wrong side of 30. Like, you don't want to pay an aging player, blah, blah, blah. Here's another question I want you guys to answer honestly down in the comments. If the Chiefs hypothetically were to sign Chris Jones to a 3-year extension this offseason, how many people honestly think, again, answer me honestly, how many people think that in the next 3 years Chris Jones is going to fall off a cliff, that his production is just going to fall off a cliff? I don't get that. I don't get that logic. I don't get that thinking, because Chris Jones is a dominant player. I don't think he's going to stop being dominant in the next few years. And even if he's not at the peak of his powers, he's still going to be a productive pass rusher. He's still going to be drawing those double teams. Defensive tackles age relatively well. I mean, Fletcher Cox is still kicking it. He was productive last year for Philadelphia. He's in his mid-30s. Aaron Donald, I mean, you'd still take him. Like, people act like he's washed up. He's not. Ndamukong Suh made a living off just signing 1-year deals with contending teams for a long time, well into his mid-30s. And he was productive. Chris Jones can still easily be productive, can still easily be a double-digit sack guy, especially if the Chiefs surround him with the right pieces well into his 30s. If the Chiefs sign Chris Jones to a 3-year extension, I don't think he'll regret that at all. Because I think in order to three-peat next year, you have to have Chris Jones. He still needs to be a part of this team, because this defensive line, the way it is now, hell, even more specifically, the defensive tackle room is not good enough to absorb the loss of Chris Jones this offseason. It's just not. Because George Karlaftis, you take a guy like him, does he have double-digit sacks without Chris Jones in the middle? No, his pass rush win rate's not good enough. Charles Omenihu's a nice piece, but is he as good as he was this year without Chris Jones in the middle? No, he's not. He's just not. Like, outside of Chris Jones, the Chiefs don't have that guy on the defensive line that you're putting all your effort into stopping in a big playoff game. Chris Jones is the only guy. And then you look at the defensive tackle room behind him, it is atrocious. The defensive tackle room behind Chris Jones is Matt Dickerson, Neil Farrell, who was a healthy scratch all year, and like Tershawn Wharton. Tershawn Wharton might be a free agent. I can't remember off the top of my head. But like, it's bad, guys. It's bad. And so if you lose Chris Jones, and if he walks on free agency for nothing, if you don't tag him, that's a devastating loss for this defense, for this defensive line. I just think that this defense isn't what it is without Chris Jones this year. If you take him off this defense, it takes a major step back next year. And here's the other thing, too, that I haven't seen people talk that much about. If you look at Veach's track record on the defensive line, it's not spectacular. It's gotten better recently, but it's not spectacular. His best move on the defensive line since he's been here has been retaining Chris Jones. But if you look at what Veach has been able to do in the secondary, he's been able to find contributors for cheap. And he's been able to find good players late in the draft. I mean, hell, L'Jarius Sneed himself was a 4th-round pick by Brett Veach. You got guys like Brian Cook, who was a 3rd-rounder, maybe a 2nd-rounder. I can't remember off the top of my head. I'm sorry, but relatively high pick. But, you know, Jalen Watson, 7th-round pick. Joshua Williams, 6th-round pick. Nick Jones, they really seem to like. He was a 7th-round pick last year. Veach has been able to find guys for cheap, like Bashaud Breeland. You could always get like a Bashaud Breeland type free agent that isn't going to break the bank like L'Jarius Sneed will. And you could be fine. You know, I think you'll hold up just fine on the back end. But Chris Jones is a game changer. He's a game wrecker. L'Jarius Sneed is very good in coverage. He was very good at locking down number 1 wide receivers this year, but he's not a game wrecker like Chris Jones is. Chris Jones is more valuable to this defense. We're not talking about a 35-year-old Chris Jones. We're talking about a 30-year-old Chris Jones that still has several elite years left in the tank, in my opinion. And people are talking about him like you just can't pay him because you're going to regret it in a few years. You're not. I don't believe that. I think that's a lazy excuse. I think that's lazy analysis. And I think if you look at this honestly, yes, L'Jarius Sneed is younger, so you might feel better about paying him. And he's probably not going to demand as much as Chris Jones because Chris Jones is a premium pass rusher. Premium pass rushers cost more than cornerbacks. But if we're just straight up talking about who's more important, it's Chris Jones. And I don't think it's necessarily close. And this is why I've always been on the Chris Jones train. Chris Jones is a Hall of Famer, a future Hall of Famer. I'm not there yet with L'Jarius Sneed. He has 1 year of elite play, 1 year of elite production. He's a nice piece, man. I like him, but I just think Chris Jones, you have to find a way to keep him because premium pass rushers, elite pass rushers, yeah, they're expensive, but when you have one like Chris Jones on your roster, you typically do whatever it takes to hold on to a guy like that. I just think that Chris Jones, so much of what this defense does revolves around him and him generating pressure, him drawing double teams, him being able to rush off the edge as well as rush inside. Like, you can't just find that in the draft. You're not drafting another Chris Jones. If this team gets rid of Chris Jones, you're going to spend the next 10 years trying to find another Chris Jones. And you're not going to find one. You can find another L'Jarius Sneed. I am confident in Brett Veach. I'm confident in this front office that they can find another L'Jarius Sneed. Hell, even if you lose L'Jarius Sneed this offseason, you still have Trent McDuffie, who was the All-Pro. He got the All-Pro nod over L'Jarius Sneed. I think Trent McDuffie has the ability to shut down number ones just as L'Jarius Sneed did. And then we can do this whole thing in the draft again. You draft another cornerback at some point in the draft, and I'm going to feel pretty good about it. You can pick up a solid contributor in the defensive backfield, off the scrap heap in free agency. But I just don't think you're doing that with pass rush. Brett Veach has struggled to find pass rush. You have pass rush in Chris Jones. You don't want to get rid of that. He's the engine to this defense. Steve Spagnuolo knows how important Chris Jones is. Chris Jones wants to be here. Not saying L'Jarius Sneed doesn't, but Chris Jones wants to be here, and I think you need to do everything you can to make sure that he's back on this roster in 2024. I think a 3-year extension is very ideal. I think it's possible. And hopefully all this that I'm saying ends up not mattering. The Chiefs find a way to keep both, because that's the best case scenario, is that they find a way to keep both. And ultimately, I do think the Chiefs will tag L'Jarius Sneed. They will try to get a deal with Chris Jones done. But if Chris Jones hits the open market, gets a deal from someone else, like a ludicrous offer from like Chicago or something, who I think might be gearing up to make a run towards Chris Jones in free agency, you know, if he says, hey, Chicago's offering me $31 million a year, can you match that? I don't think the Chiefs are matching that. Not if they also plan on keeping L'Jarius Sneed long term. A lot of it hinges on what they do with L'Jarius Sneed once he's on the tag, because I am pretty certain that L'Jarius Sneed is the one that's getting the tag, and what they do with him is going to tell us a lot about what's going to happen with Chris Jones. But yeah, guys, those are my thoughts. That's my opinion. Let me know down in the comments what your thoughts are, if you agree with me, disagree with me. Who do you think is more important to keep, L'Jarius Sneed or Chris Jones? Which one would you rather pay? A lot to discuss here. I'm sure we'll have a lot of mixed reviews, mixed opinions in the comments. I'm excited to hear the reaction on this one. With all that being said, make sure you like, share, and subscribe so more Chiefs fans can find this. And make sure you check out my work on showmefootball.com and arrowheadaddict.com for more. See you all in the next one. Go Chiefs.